Wow, what a great 2 days we've had so far. Good afternoon and welcome to the final day of the UT Dallas Women's Summit. My name is Tom Kim and I'm the Assistant Dean of the Career Management Center at UT Dallas. We hope you have enjoyed the summit so far and thank you for joining us for the final keynote. Before we get started, I want to also thank Dresden and the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship for this great partnership and also for all the work that they put in. And as we teach our students, networking is so vital to everyday life. So don't forget to try out the virtual booths and networking options to connect with each other and learn more about the resources available to you. Also, if you would, we'd love to hear some chats from you. So comment in the chat section as we go through today's event about what was your favorite takeaway so far. Today, we are going to hear about the power of science, women in STEM and media. To kick off our session for today, I would like to introduce you to a guest from today's keynote sponsor, We Dallas. So please welcome Unique Carey.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. My name is Unique Carey, and on behalf of Capital One, I want to welcome everyone to our We Dallas event. Capital One has a 6-year partnership with the Dallas Entrepreneur Center and helps create We Dallas, a year-round program that inspires, equips, and empowers women entrepreneurs across North Texas. And while attending the earlier sessions this week, is that the reach of inspiration has surpassed these Texas borders. Now, this is the second year for We Dallas to partner with the UT Dallas Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and the JSUM Career Management Center for their annual Women's Summit. I cannot think of a better afternoon spent than with a group of women and allies lifting each other up and cheering each other on as we pursue the next steps in our careers. Whether this is your first or 100th event, thank you for being here today to invest in yourself and in your business. Some of you may not know this, but Capital One is still a founder led company. We understand the passion and challenges that exist in becoming a sustainable business that thrives in today's market. We have partnered with many successful startups and are still working to understand the unique challenges and opportunities business face every day so we can build solutions and experiences designed to help them succeed and grow. I believe that each and every one of you has a powerful story to tell, and every step of your journey has a purpose. For me personally, I used to be a classroom teacher. For close to 10 years, I worked alongside some of the world's harshest yet most honest critics. You may call them middle schoolers. That classroom experience was an amazing training ground for the role that I have today within Capital One. I serve as an engagement specialist on our community impact and investment team. And I'm constantly referring back to, leaning on, and leveraging all of my experiences and those relationships that I share with my students and their parents and the neighborhood at large. Those experiences helped me to maintain empathy and to keep a perspective, which is so crucial in the work that I lead to make sure that I'm having an impact on our communities and, more importantly, on our future leaders. And that's why I am so excited to be speaking with Emily, the Space Gal, today. But my hope for you is that you feel inspired to make your dreams a reality and work toward becoming the innovative pioneer of tomorrow with the confidence and skills to achieve even greater levels of success. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Emily Calandrelli, our keynote speaker today. Emily is the host and co-executive producer of the hit Netflix series, Emily's Wonder Lab, where she works with a group of kid scientists as they learn about STEAM through experiments and fun activities. Emily is also an accomplished writer and speaker on the topics of space exploration, scientific literacy, and equality. Emily attended West Virginia University, where she received a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and Aerospace Engineering, and attended MIT, where she earned two master's degrees, one in aeronautics and astronautics, and the other in technology and policy. Emily frequently gives talks about the importance of science literacy, the benefits of space exploration, and the challenges for women in STEM careers. And we're excited to hear from her for our Women's Summit today. Emily, take it away.
Hello, thank you so much. Also, Unique, your entire aesthetic, you look like you just walked out of an Instagram post. It's very beautiful. Okay, so hi everyone. I am so excited to talk to you today. As Unique said, my name is Emily Calandrelli. I'm known as the Space Gal online. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about my career, women in STEM, or rather the lack thereof, and some of the areas that I think there's room for improvement in terms of how we can get more women in STEM, or rather make STEM more welcoming for women. And then later, I'm going to talk a little bit about the power of media, social media and other types of media, because I think it's a tool in our tool set that we don't often appreciate as much as we should. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. Here we go. Lovely. So yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and now recently TikTok at the Space Gal. And so my background's in engineering. I have 4 degrees in science and engineering, but now today I am a science communicator, and I do that work on TV, on Netflix, on YouTube, on various social media platforms. But I started off with my first TV show, Exploration Outer Space, which is a show on Fox on Saturday mornings, airs in like 60 million households each week. And in that show, I travel all around the country to different NASA centers and private space companies and universities and talk to the most incredible people in the space industry today about rockets and spaceships and rovers on Mars and searching for aliens and everything in between. For a space nerd like myself, it is quite literally a dream job. After that, I started working with Bill Nye on his Netflix show, Bill Nye Saves the World. I'm a correspondent for him. This show's a little differently than mine because, of course, it's on Netflix, so the production of something like this is much greater. Its reach is much greater as well. It's available in 190 countries around the world, and so it's a very international feel, which I love because, of course, there's a ton of science and space exploration happening outside of our country. So I was able to travel to India for Bill to cover some science stories in India. I'm also the author of the Ada Lace books. Ada is a third grader who loves the science and technology and goes on these adventures to solve mysteries with technology and gadgets that she builds herself. It's kind of a book series that I wished that I had when I was a kid, a book about science and adventure where the main character was a girl, right? We didn't have too many of those growing up. We had a lot of great books that had side characters that were female, but I wanted to create a female character that really drove the storyline. The cool thing about this is the third book in the series, Ada Lace, Take Me to Your Leader, I sent to space. About a year and a half ago, I launched it on a Falcon 9 rocket through the Storytime from Space program and sent it to the International Space Station, where astronaut Anne McClain, who is coming forward in this image here, this GIF, read it aloud for this Read Aloud program, where she's literally floating on the space station, reading my chapter book, and many of the shots you can see Earth in the background. I mean, it's pretty much like a dream come true to see something that I created up in space. So that's, if you're ever looking for a good Read Aloud video, that's at storytimefromspace.com. My biggest thing most recently was I got a Netflix show, which, I mean, something that I've been kind of working toward for the last 7 years. And this show, it's called Emily's Wonder Lab, and it's all about me bringing science to younger kids and making science exciting and fun and accessible to a younger audience. There's 10 episodes in the first season, and in each episode, there's one larger than life science experiment. So think creating a pool filled with slime where we learn about the science of slime. We learn about polymers and cross-linking. And then at the end, the kids get to swim in the slime. And then at the end of each episode, there's an at-home experiment that people who are watching the show can do the science experiment from Emily's Wonder Lab with materials they have lying around their house. So one really big experiment that's larger than life, colorful, beautiful, lots of explosions, and then one smaller experiment so that people who are at home who might be looking for some creative educational materials right about now can have something to do with their kids that's educational and also very fun. And other than this, my career in science communication is very odd sometimes. A little while ago, I spoke to Will Smith about the International Space Station for his YouTube channel. This morning, I was talking to Drew Barrymore about space and bringing the first woman to the moon through NASA's Artemis program for her new talk show. And so it's just a very fun career where I get to bring my love of science and space exploration to different people through different creative outlets. But how did I get interested in space in the first place? Well, when I was a kid, when I was younger, I didn't know any scientists or engineers. This was not something I expected that I would be doing when I was older. My dad grew up in poverty, and he worked his way up to become the first person in his family to go to college. He was the youngest of 4 children. He bought their family their very first car when he was like 18 or 19 years old, went to college, worked his way up to bring our family to middle class. And so I had that legacy in the back of my mind when I was choosing what I wanted to do when I was deciding what to do in college. And so I literally Googled all the majors one could major in college, and I looked at their starting salaries, and I found that engineers made the most money after a 4-year degree. And so I chose engineering mostly because I was like, well, I want to get a good job. This is going to suck. The next 4 years of my life are going to be very hard. But when I leave, it's going to be worth it. It's going to have a good job. I'm going to make my dad proud. Well, it turns out that I loved engineering and I became obsessed with it as the years went on. But when I got to college, I knew I wanted to do engineering, wasn't sure what type. I'm walking down the hallways of West Virginia University and I see a poster on the hallway that looks kind of like this. And it says, do your homework weightless. And I remember thinking, what kind of nerd metaphor is that? Do your homework weightless. What are they talking about? Well, it turns out it was a class you could take if you wanted to be an aerospace engineer. And in this class, you would work with your friends to design a science experiment and fly on something called the Vomit Comet. Now, the Vomit Comet, if you are unfamiliar, is the coolest thing you will ever learn about. The Vomit Comet is a plane that flies in the air like an 8,000-foot roller coaster in the sky. And it does that so that the people inside, for brief moments of time, will float weightless, like astronauts. And so when it goes over the hump like this, the people inside are free falling. They feel weightless for about 25 seconds. And then of course it has to go back up. And that's when you feel about twice your weight. You feel really heavy. So you feel weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy and weightless and heavy for an hour and a half, which is why they call it the Vomit Comet. And I certainly helped it live up to its name, because when you're on this for that long, you get a little bit sick. You can see when I'm in my flight suit, you have a pocket up here. And in that pocket, you bring the most important tool that you will bring on that plane. And that, of course, is a barf bag. Because if you get sick when you're weightless, where does that barf go? It goes everywhere. And remember, there's science experiments everywhere, so that's no good. And so if you get sick, you throw up in your barf bag, you tie it off, you hand it off to somebody who works there. Not the best job in the world, but a very important one. And then you go about your floating business. But this is the reason why I chose to go into aerospace engineering. And to this day, it's one of the most fun things I've ever done. And I want to show you some clips of this experience. I've now flown on the Vomit Comet 3 times, and here are some highlights from that.
Before we land, I have a few things left on my zero-G bucket list. A spacewalk. Plus some acrobatics.
Oh my god! Eating like an astronaut.
Snacking. And even juggling.
You can actually do them.
I don't know
Another
if you
dance
can
move we need to try is the
hear
pirouette.
what's going on here, but
On
if you
land,
can,
Sam's pirouette was
we're
smooth and
essentially
effortless.
testing out different dance
Let's see
moves
how he does
and
up here.
weightlessness. He's a professional dancer.
Effortless, but not so smooth. Now
I am
it's
not.
my turn. Obviously not a professional
As you
dancer.
can see.
Wow!
I will say my hair has never
Maybe
been more
if we hold
voluminous.
hands, we can have more control.
Microgravity does that.
Not quite. Here's
This is
another
harder than it
experiment.
looks.
Jumping through a hula hoop.
Moving your body in weightlessness is a very, very weird and challenging
Now
thing
that I've
to
seen
do.
Sam's attempt, it's my turn.
Basically just setting myself up for you to be impressed that I could do this.
She's a pro! She's a pro!
Let's face it, if you're going to have a once-in-a-lifetime experience, you
My
might
favorite
as well have some fun.
So that's my story of how I got into engineering, but I'm a little bit unique, right? Because it's still a very male-dominated field. Women make up 57% of the US workforce, but only about 29% of STEM jobs. And when you get to the leadership positions in these STEM fields, it's much worse. And so to highlight the demographic of the leadership positions, the highest positions in the space industry, we can look at the demographic of the people who have been to space. And out of the 560 some people who have gone to space, only about 11% of those have been women. Not a great number, not a high number. One of the reasons I think this is a big deal is because going to space is a really unique opportunity. The astronauts who have gone to space talk about how they experience something called the overview effect. Now, the overview effect is this cognitive shift in perspective of how you think about our planet and the humans on this planet. From this vantage point that you see here, it becomes immediately clear that we are all species living on this tiny, fragile ball hanging in this dark, dangerous void of space. And these astronauts who experience this, they come back home and they talk about how their lives are changed. They want to be a better neighbor to each other. They want to be a better steward of the environment. They write books. They give all these talks about their experience. But all of these powerful, impactful stories are told from a limited perspective. Mostly male, mostly white, mostly American, and mostly scientists and engineers, because these are the people that have gone to space. But I want you to consider, how might the world change if we had more people from diverse backgrounds experiencing the overview effect? What art and music and poetry might be created? What education plans would be put in place? What laws might be passed? What Drake song would be written? Right? And I say that only half kidding, because I think if there were more people with diverse backgrounds who could reach different people than are traditionally reached with all of this messaging, I think the world would change for the better. And so NASA in particular is doing a much better job of selecting female astronauts, but that wasn't always the case. And when they sent their first woman, Sally Ride, into space, the NASA engineers on the ground weren't very diverse either. And one story that really drives this point home: when NASA was preparing for Sally Ride's first spaceflight in 1983, there was some question about what would go in her personal kit. Engineers, all of whom were men at the time, needed to figure out how many tampons she would need for a 1-week mission in space. Is 100 the right number, they said, for a 7-day mission? And usually I have to preface this by saying, like, those of you in the room who've never had the joy of experiencing a period, this number is too high. But I probably don't have to clarify that here. She said no, that would not be the right number. And then, in a remarkable case of mansplaining, the engineers told her that they had come up with that number logically because they wanted to be safe. Failure was not an option. And so she told them that they could cut that number in half and they would still be very, very safe. Now, of course, this is a silly example of what happens when your team is not very diverse, but unfortunately, it is just one example of lack of diversity leading to, let's call it, inefficiencies. But here are some more. If you've ever been in a workplace that felt just a little bit too cold, that might be because the original formula that defined the standard office temperature was developed in the 1960s around the metabolic rusting rate of the average man. And this resulted in many offices who followed this being about 5 degrees too cold for the average woman. And I'm sure we all have personal stories like this, but I remember visiting my mom's office when I was a kid. She was a secretary. And when I would go to her office in the summer, it would be really hot outside, but freezing in her building. And her and all of the other women who worked there had these little space heaters under their desk. It was kind of like their way of fighting back. And it was all just like grossly inefficient, right? Now, if you've ever waited in a long line in a women's restroom and noticed that there was absolutely no line for the men's restroom, that's likely because when civil engineers and architects are designing restrooms for buildings, they often allocate the same amount of space for both. That seems fair, right? The problem with that is that in the men's restroom, they have both stalls and urinals in the same amount of space. And so more people can relieve themselves at once in the same amount of space. On average, women need about twice as long in the bathroom. And also, the majority of elderly and disabled are women who also need more time in the bathroom. And then children are more likely to accompany women to the bathroom. And this also takes more time. You see, all of these things add up. So is it really fair that the same amount of space is allocated for men and women's bathrooms? How might bathrooms look differently if more women were in the room when these were designed? Now, these examples of not including women in design are a bit annoying, but excluding women in science and technology design can also be dangerous. So let's look at personal protective equipment. Personal protective equipment like body armor for police or even face masks have typically been sized for the average man. And because there are differences in chest, hips, and thighs and facial structure between men and women, this often results in ill-fitting protective equipment that can be dangerous. It's not working as it should. There's a story of a female police officer who had to get breast reduction surgery because her body armor was too uncomfortable for her to wear. And then after her story came to light, 700 other women in her same police force stepped forward to say the same, say that their standard issue protective vest was ill-fitting for them as well. And then there's cars. So cars have been traditionally designed using car crash dummies based on the average man. And because of this, women, when they are involved in a car crash, are 47% more likely to be seriously injured and 71% more likely to be moderately injured than a man in a similar car crash. It wasn't until 2011, this boggles my mind. It wasn't until 2011 that the US required car manufacturers to even use female test dummies in car crash safety tests. 2011 is not that long ago. And even the worst part is even sometimes the female test dummies that they use are just scaled down versions in size of the male one. And the problem with that is that unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. Women are physically different than men, not just in size, but we have muscle mass distribution differences. We have lower bone density. We have different vertebrae spacing. And all of this influences how injuries occur when we're in a car crash. And so now this inefficiency is something I think about every single time I step into a car. And finally, lack of female representation is also found in the medical industry. A new study that came out just this year from UC Berkeley and the University of Chicago looked at 86 different medications approved by the FDA, 86 different medications that are approved by the FDA, and found that women experience adverse drug side effects twice as often than men. And this is because drug dosages have historically been based on clinical trials conducted on men alone. For decades, women were excluded from clinical drug trials based in part because of these unfounded concerns that female hormone fluctuations rendered women difficult to study. So we have all of these years of built up clinical trials that just did not include women and did not include many women. So excluding women from these clinical trials comes at a cost, and that's the health of women. When it comes to prescribing drugs, a one-size-fits-all approach where we assume that the average man, typically the average white man, is the average human, it simply doesn't work. It does not work. And now these are just a few examples, but you can see that when you don't have women involved at various stages of science and technology design, it leads to problems. At best, it's just annoying and inefficient, like too many tampons in space, right? But at worst, it's deadly. It's affecting our health. This isn't good for companies. It's not good for our country, and it's certainly not good for women. So what can we do about it? Well, there are three main areas that I think have a lot of room for improvement. And that includes the representation of women in STEM and media, something I'm really passionate about. This is like things in books and TV shows and movies, because at a young age, our brains use the media we were exposed to figure out what image we formulate in our brain when we think scientist or engineer. We can make STEM more welcoming for people who want families, particularly women who want families. And lastly, I think we can market STEM jobs better to younger people. Now, of course, there are other incredibly important issues like racial discrimination and sexual harassment and hiring and promoting biases in this field, but that is a talk for another day. So to go through these three, representation of women in STEM in media, in books and TV shows, things like that, it's pretty abysmal. There's really just not much of it. And this is definitely getting better, but historically it hasn't been good. Over the last 5 years, I've pitched science shows to major science networks and have gotten some interesting feedback. I have been pretty unsuccessful for the most part. And sometimes this feedback is very direct. One time they said, we love the show. Unfortunately, our audience is a male-dominated audience, and we just don't think they would relate well to a solo female host. And they said, do you have a boyfriend or something that could co-host a show with you? Very unfortunate feedback. And then when you look at the lineup of science shows on major science networks and you look at their hosts, they look remarkably similar. And so I'll let you see for yourself. I want you to watch a preview of this major science network show lineup and see if you notice anything interesting.
All the good love. Give it up, whoa. Yeah, you turn me on. What kind of feeling? That you're in love with me. What kind of feeling?
So you probably catch my drift. Every single person in that video was a guy, except for one woman who was mostly naked. And at the end, they say, the world is ours. It's like, yeah, guys, that's a little too on the nose. In the media world, it absolutely is. So you have this unfortunate feedback loop where science networks choose guys to host their science shows, and then they get a predominantly male audience. And then they use that to justify choosing more male-driven shows. And then it goes on and on and on. It's this really bad feedback loop. So you can imagine the feeling I had as a woman who pitched science shows for years and received feedback like that for years, getting a call from Netflix saying they wanted my show. And not just that they wanted my show, but they were totally fine with me being pregnant while filming it. I am 9 months pregnant here. And so now there's a pregnant woman hosting a female-led science show in 190 countries, dubbed over in 38 different languages on the largest streaming platform in the world. And I don't think I quite realized the impact that would have. And I want to show just one example here. This is the Draw a Scientist test. The Draw a Scientist test was first conducted in 1987 in order to study when children learn about the stereotypes of scientists. In the original study, about 5,000 kids were included, and only 28 of those 5,000 kids drew female scientists. All of those kids were girls. 0 of the boys had drawn female scientists. So that's only about 0.5% of all of the drawings that had female scientists. Over the years, the study has been done 80 more times with over 20,000 students. Gradually, that percentage got better. Today, as of 2016, 58% of girls draw female scientists, but still only 10% of boys draw female scientists. And a month ago, a follower sent me this homework assignment from their child, their son Gavin. When asked to draw a scientist at school, and keep in mind, I don't know who these people are. I don't know them personally. This is just a random person that sent me this. He drew me from Emily's Wonder Lab. He drew my 9-month pregnant bump. When he thought of scientists, this is what he saw. And this is just one example. I mean, parents have told me that their daughters want to dress up as Emily from Emily's Wonder Lab, dress up as a scientist for Halloween. There are girls having their own Wonder Lab themed birthday parties. It's all very exciting. So shows like this, they create real change. They change the way we see ourselves. They change the way we see others. And I wish that more major networks understood that, or perhaps cared about that. So another area that can be addressed is making STEM more welcoming to families and particularly mothers. This is my husband and my daughter. She's over 1 now, so this is when she was such a little baby. So Sheryl Sandberg, she's now at Facebook, but back when she was an executive at Google and she became pregnant, she had to ask Larry Page and Sergey Brin to designate parking for expectant mothers. She illustrates this in her book very vividly, and she talks about waddling on her swollen pregnant feet from way, way back in the back of the parking lot all the way to her office. And the Google founders, they agreed, and they had said that that was just not an issue they had ever thought about. Because of course they hadn't, because they'd never been pregnant, which is why it's important to have people with different lived experiences having power to craft policies and make decisions at various organizations. And parking, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. STEM is just not a very welcoming place for people who want families, in particular women. A study done between 2003 and 2010 looked at 841 parents in STEM and found that 43% of the women, 43% of the women left their full-time STEM job after having their first child. They either stopped working altogether, moved to part-time work, or moved to a totally non-STEM job altogether. 43%. That's a really scary number if you're a young woman in STEM who hopes to have a family someday. And it's not just the women, it's men too. 23% of men in this study also left their full-time job after having their first child. And one of the biggest barriers here, in my opinion, is paid maternity and paternity leave. Now, in most states in the country, just think about this. In most states in the country, it's illegal to separate a puppy from its mother before 8 weeks old. But in the United States, we're the only developed nation in the entire world without a federally mandated paid maternity leave policy. Just something to think about. What priorities do we have, right? But in addition to this, there's also smaller things like clean, accessible nursing and pumping rooms. I was always so appreciative of that when I was traveling, when NASA centers and various universities had those, especially when they had them in airports. That was really key, and even parking for expectant mothers. And lastly, I think we can market the concept of STEM jobs better to kids, because oftentimes the idea of a scientist is portrayed as someone who is working in isolation and perhaps working towards a self-interested goal or a capitalistic goal. Think creating the next hot technology in Silicon Valley that's going to make $1 billion or something. Nothing inherently wrong about that, but studies show that girls at a higher rate than boys want to work with other people. They value working with others. And B, they value altruistic careers that feel as if they will help make the world a better place. And so it may be no surprise that some STEM careers have better representation of women, like in biomedical engineering and environmental engineering, more so than things like mechanical engineering that I did, or computer engineering. It's really abysmal in computer engineering as well. So we can do a better job of showcasing how these other STEM jobs make the world a better place, because of course they do. And when it comes to space exploration, I showcase examples where people are using space-based technology to make the world a better place. Planet Labs, for example, this is a company based where I live, based here in California, has about 100 satellites circling the Earth right now. And that number may not seem like a huge deal, but at one point in the last few years, that was the largest satellite constellation that the world had ever seen. 100 satellites operating around our Earth. And they do this so that they can create an entirely new image of our planet every single day. Each of those satellites has cameras and sensors on it to create this beautiful imagery like the ones you're seeing on this slide here. Now, a new image of our Earth every day is a big deal, because while you may think, well, we've had pictures of our planet from like Google Maps and Google Earth for a really long time now, right? Well, those images that you see on Google Earth or Google Maps, those are between 1 and 3 years old. So this is now the difference between seeing how our planet changes year after year to seeing how our planet is changing on a daily basis. So now just think of all the things that you can do with that. To give you one example of what they're doing today, here in California, they're starting to track hotspots where wildfires are likely to start. Essentially, they see where plant life is starting to die and build up, and they can do this by seeing what wavelengths of light are absorbed, because healthy plants will absorb certain wavelengths of light, and then they can see what wavelengths of light are reflected, because plants with lots of leaves will reflect certain wavelengths of near infrared light. And this data will hopefully help California prevent wildfires in the future. But even once a fire does start, these satellites can really help track where the fire is spreading, because they can use different light sensors on satellites, infrared light, to see through the smoke and be able to see where that fire is spreading, kind of like very Superman-esque, like Superman in the sky being able to track where the fires are spreading. And this helps first responders make smart decisions in almost real time, and helps local governments figure out how to allocate resources more efficiently so that the people who need the most help are getting the most resources. So basically, they're helping to save lives and helping to save people's homes by using technology from space. And I think that's really exciting. So I've talked about my career as a science communicator, and we've talked about the lack of women in STEM and why that's a problem, and a few key ways to help fix that. But I also want to end this presentation by showing you the power that media has in this equation. And I say this from the perspective of someone who has an engineering degree from MIT. I have a background in science, and now I'm doing science communication on places like TikTok and Will Smith's YouTube channel and the Drew Barrymore show, right? And to people who know that I got an engineering degree from MIT, that career shift sounds confusing. In fact, in one interview that I did for my show, where I was interviewing a chief scientist at I'll say a prominent organization, this woman asked me straight up, how did I go from being an MIT engineer to now just being a talking head? Not everybody understands the influence or the importance of media, especially when it comes to science communication. And so let me just show you a few examples where media, social media or otherwise, have influenced society for the better. The Jolie effect. You may remember in 2013, Angelina Jolie announced that she had tested positive for the BRCA gene, and then went ahead and got a preventative double mastectomy. That's because people who have the BRCA gene have a 50 to 85% chance of getting breast cancer in their lifetime. And she was just incredibly brave by sharing this decision with the world. Well, according to a study by Harvard Medical School, there was a 64% increase in American women who were getting genetic tests for breast cancer in the 2 weeks after Angelina Jolie's article came out. Harvard now refers to this as the Jolie effect. You probably remember, or maybe you have seen the HBO series Watchmen. It's so good. This is based off of a comic of the same name. And the show highlights, right in the beginning, in the very first episode, it highlights the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, in which Tulsa's affluent Greenwood district, also known as Black Wall Street, was burned to the ground by a bunch of white racist people, killing hundreds of innocent Black people in the process. And it's an awful part of history, but it's one of the most severe events of racial violence in U.S. history. It's a very important one to remember. But it wasn't included in Oklahoma curriculum. And many people from Oklahoma and even people from Tulsa had no idea that it was part of their state's history. That was until HBO's Watchmen came out. And now Oklahoma's education department is incorporating the Tulsa Race Massacre into student lesson plans across the state for the very first time. This is an instance where a popular TV show is actually changing education. It is changing what we decide is important to learn, which is really exciting. Now, The Hunger Games, you probably remember its lead character, Katniss Everdeen, wields a bow and arrow throughout the book and, of course, the movie. Well, when the movies took the world by storm, membership in USA Archery, the governing body of the Olympic sport, more than doubled. with most of that membership being driven by little girls. In fact, so many girls were requesting the same bow that Katniss had, something called a recurve bow, a very classic bow, I guess, that the manufacturing of this bow was backed up, and many places were reporting that it was going to take up to 5 months to even get it in. The archery trade organization saw this as an opportunity. They were riding the wave of the popularity of the Hunger Games, and they shifted their advertising dollars to encourage more kids and teens to pick up the sport. They just really shifted their entire brand because of the influence that a movie had. NPR, who did a story on this, was reporting that indoor shooting ranges across the country used to be dominated by camouflage and hunters, kind of what you'd expect. I'm from West Virginia, and that's what I would expect. And after the movie came out, it was taken over by ponytails and little girls. And finally, one that is very personally meaningful, the movie Hidden Figures highlighted some incredible women who contributed to the Apollo program. And one of those hidden figures was Katherine Johnson, who was from my home state of West Virginia. Now, when you come from a state like West Virginia, you memorize all of the famous people who have ever done anything wonderful. You memorize all of their names, like Jennifer Gardner and Chuck Yeager and Steve Harvey and Homer Hickam and former president of MIT, Chuck Vest, and Brad Paisley and Don Knotts. I mean, like you memorize all of them. And so as a West Virginian, for us not to know Katherine Johnson, who worked on the Apollo program and was integral to the Apollo program, it's surprising and it's disappointing that we didn't know about her. So I think this is probably a sign that there are many women, particularly Black women and women of color, who have done incredible things throughout history that we will never know about, right? There's many hidden figures out there. But West Virginia as a whole was very excited to now know who Katherine Johnson is. And so much so that we changed the one NASA center that we have in our state. We changed the name of that facility, and it is now proudly named the Katherine Johnson Independent Verification and Validation Center, which is really cool. So these examples are all to show that we shouldn't underestimate the power of social media, of being creative with our messaging in TV shows and movies. These are things that change the collective consciousness of society. These things change what we decide is important, how we see ourselves and how we see others. And they can be used as a tool to share things that we are passionate about. For me, that's getting people excited about science and space exploration and hopefully changing the demographic of these fields in the process. So thank you all so much for listening, and I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Emily, you are such an inspiration. You know, I was able to watch a few of your TED Talks and your episodes of Emily's Wonder Lab, and your commitment to equality and inclusion in STEM really shines through. And your message was just so inspiring. Even if you're not in STEM, I think there was some nuggets there. I was taking notes, and I was just thinking about how, like, the vomit comet is similar to any experience. If you own a business, whether you're starting it or you're trying to keep it going, you're riding that vomit comet. There are some highs, there are some lows. There are some times when you're able to just be weightless and flow, and then there's some times that you feel that weight just double on you. And that overview effect, it just thinking about changing that perspective, and then making your team more diverse to solve for the lack of inefficiencies. You don't have to be in science to get some golden nuggets from what you said. And thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us. And I would like to bring our audience in because we've had some amazing questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Sherry, and she really was honest, and I love it. Thank you, Sherry, for being honest. She said, sadly, sometimes I am more blind to gender bias than I thought. What can a person like me from an older generation, how can we be more cognizant about gender bias? What can we do to fix, change, modify this frame of mind for ourselves and for our kids?
Oh, wow. And that is so important. I think that's the biggest step when it comes to sort of like these misogynistic ideas and even these racist ideas that we have based on society, these subconscious things that happen throughout our life. We have to recognize that everybody has those and we all need to do work on ourselves. And I think that that's the first step, is to admit that it's not a black and white issue. It's not you're misogynistic or you're not, you're racist or you're not. I think that's actually pretty harmful because we all have these things that we can work on. And so recognizing that first is really important. And for me, I learned a lot on this based on various books that I've read when it comes to gender bias. Invisible Women is a really, really good book. The author is escaping me, but Invisible Women. And then Angela Saini has a really good book similarly on women in STEM bias and also racism in STEM. She has a separate one that's called Superior for racism and STEM bias. So Inferior is her first one, and Superior is her second one. And so these are all things that, there are scholars in this field that we can learn from. And that for me, that's been really helpful.
Oh, those are some great book suggestions. I was kind of jotting them down here, trying to make sure that I capture those. Did want to get a few more questions in. So I'm going to move on to Jamila James' question. She said, yes, as a parent, any advice on how to foster a STEM environment at home without forcing it, like family activities where both adults and kids are engaged? And I think you have one great solution to offer her and many more.
I would suggest Emily's Wonder Lab if you're looking for something. There are these wonderful experiments at the end of each episode that are super fun to do in your house. And for me, my strategy is all about inspiring curiosity through play, because sometimes we think of science as this like very intimidating body of knowledge that you just have to memorize. But it shouldn't be like that. Science is just all about curiosity and being thoughtful about how we seek truth in the world, how we ask the right, interesting questions. And so encouraging your kids to ask questions, encouraging them to do experiments and hypothesize. What do you think will happen when we do this? Why do you think that? Why is that your educated guess? And for me, just making it fun and playful is really helpful, and doing things that you are excited about, because your kids are watching you, and if you are genuinely interested in something, then they will also be like, wait, what's this all about?
That's great. And I just want to also add, now I am not a parent, but I was watching some of your episodes and I can definitely see incorporating some of those into date nights or like hanging out with the girls, just changing it up. So it is not something that is just limited to the kids. It also can be a date night type of thing, especially since some of us are still quarantining and we can't get out, but you might have some peroxide. There's even one, I think you had the barfing pumpkin. So Halloween is coming up. That's definitely a great one to watch. Make sure you're doing it outside with some plastic. So definitely being excited really can get everyone excited.
I totally agree. And so many of these things I've started doing on TikTok now too. I think we're all starting to we have weird hobbies during quarantine. And for me, that it was TikTok. And so I'm doing a few of those experiments in my backyard. And you can see that when I do them, I'm always like amazed. They're not just fun for kids. They're fun for everyone. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there.
I know we had a few more questions, but I know that we're running short on time. I just want to say thank you again so much for everything that you have shared with our audience. Thank you for sharing your journey and thank you for sharing your wisdom. So we're going to move on, and it is now time to say goodbye to Emily and start our introductions for our closing remarks. I'm going to introduce Bill Chen. He began his career at GameStop, then built his own successful real estate company and taught entrepreneurship at SMU and UNT. As a leader with 25 plus years experience, Bill now serves as the CEO of the DEC Network, which includes 6 innovation hubs across DFW that provides entrepreneurs with education, mentorship, and community. We are grateful to the DEC for all of their support for the 2020 Women's Summit, and we are pleased to welcome Bill Chen for closing remarks. Take it over, Bill.
Thank you so much, Unique. Great introduction and amazing presentation from Emily. So we're a nonprofit. The DEC Network works with entrepreneurs and small business owners here in the DFW area. And we love participating in the Women's Summit, partly because we get to work with wonderful folks like Dresden and her team at UTD, the Capital One team, and Robin, Unique, and all the folks who are so supportive of our community and making sure that we're sort of addressing real issues here, right? And I think obviously we've got a very real, important, and urgent issue when we look at gender bias. And we've seen a lot of it historically against women entrepreneurs. At least quantifiably, we see it most often in the arena of access to capital, but really it operates on a lot of very dangerous levels. So it's really exciting to see folks get together, being really open about it, talking about it, trying to figure out ways where we can even that playing field. And while this prejudice is unconscionable on a lot of levels, strangely enough, it does provide an opportunity. And if we can come together as a community and be a leader in addressing some of these issues and making this playing field much more even and fair, it allows us to bring all of our resources to bear, which means that as a community, Dallas-Fort Worth is going to be much more competitive. So when we look at our friends in Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston, and we have to go and compete on an entrepreneurial level with those folks, if we can be the leader in making sure that all of these playing fields are the way they should be, and that is even and fair, then we can deploy all our resources and be much more competitive. And I think Dallas-Fort Worth has done a wonderful job of being competitive, but there's more work we can do, and particularly in the areas of supporting women entrepreneurs. The DEC Network is really committed to this. We have stood up a number of programs recently, working largely with Capital One and UTD and some other wonderful folks in the community. We've stood up a mentoring program which allows women entrepreneurs to be mentored by more experienced, largely women entrepreneurs. And I think a number of resources that we have on our website at thedec.com, we have tailored to make sure that we're addressing this, again, important and urgent issue. So we're at the end of an amazing 3 days, and it really went off well. We should all be kind of proud and excited to have been part of it, and I hope we've all kind of taken notes and ready to make all those changes that we need to do as a community. And so we want to thank you for participating. And with that in mind, we specifically have a thank you video, which is about to play. So appreciate you all showing up for a great cause. Thank you.